Hello everyone, I'm Sarah of Rich Textures Crochet and welcome. Today we're going to learn how to crochet the low tides scarf. This is a gorgeous lacy crochet scarf pattern. It's quite large. It measures approximately 9.5 inches wide by about 95 inches long, excluding the fringe that I've added to the end, which is optional. The scarf is the same on both sides. It's an easy pattern to work. I love crochet scarves that have a fairly simple stitch pattern all the way through. I think they're just absolutely gorgeous. So today we're going to learn how to crochet the low tide scarf. I'm going to be working this in a lightweight yarn. I'm going to be using one of the Mandala Bonus Bundles. I use that for this scarf here. Each of the bonus bundles has approximately 1,181 yards of yarn in it. You're only going to need for this scarf, depending on the length of your fringe, about 2/3 of this cake. So you're not going to need the entire thing. It's a lightweight yarn. The color shown here in my sample is the color Pegasus. You're also going to want a 5mm or an H8 crochet hook. I'm using a birchwood hook by Rowan, and there will be links to both of these items down in the description of this video. Also down in the description, you'll see a direct link to the free written instructions, which are on my website at richtexturescrochet.com. So thank you so much for joining me. While you're here, I invite you to subscribe. If you love making winter scarves as I do, there are a number of other crochet scarves, including the popular Happy Trail scarf here on my channel that you may also wish to check out. And I'll link that up in the video cards of this video. So let's go ahead and get our hooks and yarn and get started. Now our scarf pattern today is worked along that short edge of the scarf. So you can really make this scarf as long or as wide as you would like. We're going to start by chaining 40, making a slip knot and chaining 42 chains. If you did want to change the width of your scarf, you're simply going to need a multiple of 8 stitches plus 2. So today I'm going to chain 42 stitches. Once you have 42 chains worked, you're going to begin row 1 by working a single crochet into the second chain from your hook, and then in each chain stitch all the way across. You'll notice that I am working into the back bumps of my stitches. This is purely my own personal preference. You can work into any side of the crochet stitch that you would like. I just like that finished edge that you'll see on the underside when you work into the back bumps of your stitches. So single crochet into that second chain from your hook, and then single crochet into each stitch all the way across. At the end of this row, you're going to have a total of 41 stitches. At the end of row 1, you're going to chain 2 and turn. Your chain 2 is going to form the first part of your beginning cluster in row 2. So row 2, you'll have a beginning cluster in this first stitch. To work the beginning cluster, you've chained 2, yarn over, insert your hook into the first stitch, the same stitch as your chain 2, yarn over and drop a loop, yarn over and pull through 2 loops, and then yarn over and pull through the final 2 loops on your hook. Next, you're going to chain 2 and then work a full cluster back into the same stitch. To work the full cluster, you're going to yarn over, insert your hook into the same stitch as your previous stitch, yarn over, drop a loop, yarn over and pull through 2. Repeat that, yarn over, insert your hook into the same stitch, yarn over, draw up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2. You'll have 3 loops on your hook. You're going to yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. That is your cluster stitch. You're going to skip the next 3 stitches and then into your next stitch, work 1 V-stitch. To work your V-stitch, you're going to work a double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet back into the same stitch. That is your V-stitch. Skip the next 3 stitches, and into your next stitch, you're going to work a cluster shell. A cluster shell stitch is a set of 3 clusters with 2 chain stitches in between each one, all into the same stitch. So work your first cluster stitch into that next stitch, chain 2, work another cluster into the same stitch, chain 2, and work 1 more cluster back into the same stitch. This is your cluster shell stitch. We're now going to repeat this all the way across. Skip the next 3 stitches, into your next stitch, work 1 V-stitch. Skip the next 3 stitches, into your next stitch, work a cluster shell stitch. Repeat that all the way across, skip 3, V-stitch, skip 3, cluster shell in the next stitch, all the way across until you come to that final stitch. When you come all the way across to your final stitch, you're going to have a V-stitch, skip the next 3 stitches, and then your final stitch. Into your final stitch of row 2, you're going to work a cluster stitch, chain 2, and then cluster stitch back down into the same stitch. That will bring you to the end of your row 2. You're going to chain 4 and turn your work. Your chain 4 is going to count as a double crochet and a chain 1. Now for row 3, we're going to double crochet back down into the same stitch as our first stitch, as our first chain 4. You're then going to skip the next chain 2 space, skip the next cluster, and into the middle of your next V-stitch, you're going to work, in the next chain 1 space, you're going to work a cluster shell, all into that same chain 1 space. Skip the next cluster stitch, and into the middle cluster of the next cluster shell, you're going to work a V-stitch. So just into the top of the middle cluster of that cluster shell, work 1 V-stitch. You're going to repeat this all the way across, working cluster shells in each chain 1 space. So in the center of each V-stitch, work your cluster shell. And then into the middle cluster of each cluster shell, work one V-stitch. Repeat this all the way across until you come to your final cluster. When you come all the way across at the end of row 3 to your final cluster stitch, you're going to finish off by working a V-stitch into the top of your final cluster. You're then going to chain 2 and turn your work. Now for row 4, that chain 2 counts as the start of your beginning cluster. So you're going to finish off this beginning cluster into the chain 1 space, the first chain 1 space. So finish off the beginning cluster, then chain 2 and work one more cluster stitch into the same chain 1 space. Then into the middle cluster of your next shell stitch, work one V-stitch. Skip the next cluster and into the next chain 1 space, the center of your V-stitch, work one cluster shell. You're going to repeat this all the way across. Work a V-stitch into the middle cluster of the next cluster shell, and then work a cluster shell into the next chain 1 space. Repeat this all the way across to your final stitch. Once you come all the way across at the end of row 4, you're going to finish off by working into the third chain from your hook of your starting chain. You're going to work a cluster stitch, chain 2, and cluster stitch, all into the third chain of that turning chain. You're then going to chain 4 and turn your work, and from here on, for the rest of your pattern, you're simply going to repeat your rows 3 and 4. So your row 3 beginning with the V-stitch, and then that row 4 that we just worked, repeat row 3 and 4 until your scarf from the beginning measures approximately 95 inches in length. Once it reaches 95 inches, you can meet me back here, and what we're going to do is we're going to work one final row. So I'm not actually going to work the full 95 inches here in the tutorial, but once you have worked 95 inches, you're going to work one final row. And to work the final row, you're simply going to single crochet into the first stitch. You'll have finished off on a repeat of the row 4. You're then going to work one single crochet into the next chain 2 space, and then single crochet into each stitch. You're going to work a single crochet into each chain space, whether that's a chain 1 or chain 2, it doesn't matter. Work one single crochet into each chain space and one single crochet into each stitch. You're going to do this all the way across, and then you can fasten off and attach your fringe to the end. I will in just a moment show you how I like to attach the fringe to the ends of my scarves. So single crochet, fasten off, weave in those ends. So once you have worked that 95 inches, you have your full scarf. I've switched back to my sample one here just to show you how I like to attach the fringe to these short ends. You're going to cut some lengths of yarn. Now this is about 6 inches. You're going to probably want 8 or 9 inches, and then you can trim them off to the right length to make sure that they're all the same size. But I like to make my fringes for my scarves with 3 strands. You're just going to cut all so that they're equal length. Then every second stitch along the edge of my scarf, insert your hook, pull those 3 strands through and fold them over so that your 2 ends meet. And then you're just going to tie a simple knot. There are many different ways to work a fringe on a scarf. This is the way I like to do it. The knots keep very well for the harsher wear of a scarf, and don't come undone if you have to wash it or anything like that. And that's all I do. So I do that every second stitch all the way along. Once you're done, you can take your pair of scissors, trim off your ends so that they're relatively all the same length. And that's all there is to working the low tide scarf. So thank you so much for joining me, and once again, don't forget to subscribe. Keep checking back. This channel is updated every single week with free crochet patterns and stitch tutorials. If you happen to make the low tide scarf and share it on social media, do be sure to tag Rich Textures Crochet, and I'll come by and admire it. Don't forget to say hello in the comments, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Until then, happy crocheting. Bye.